Did everyone have a good break? Everyone get some extra coffee? How's everyone feeling? Yeah! This is so exciting. Great to be in the content. Great to see so many amazingly attractive faces in the audience, especially that guy right there. Yeah, it is my honor to introduce the next two speakers. They are fantastic. I'm so excited to hear their talks. We gave them a whole hour just to make sure that we really got as much great content out of them as possible. Kara is been working in communities and been leading communities. She's a community builder with an expertise in cultural and large-scale organizations. She managed the UK's user-centered design community and also co-founded the International Design and Government community together. Spanning over 70 different countries. She is now the head of profession of design at the Government Digital Service. I don't think there's much more of an expert in terms of community and government design. We also have Martin Jordan. For over the last decade, he has also been building communities. Maybe you know of him before. He actually started and facilitated a conference called the Service Experience Camp, which was actually my first conference in Berlin, my very first design conference. He popped my design conference cherry, so to speak. Martin is a great friend of mine. Sadly, we lost him and he went over to the Government Digital Services in the UK and has been the head of service design there for many, many years. But thankfully, after much petitioning, I wrote letters to the government. We managed to bring him back to Berlin. Now he is working as the head of design for the digital services, a mammoth task in front of him to recreate the digital services in Germany. Oh my God, I'm so thankful that he's back with us. My burger-armed experiences will be forever changed. I'm going to shut up now, but please give the biggest warm welcome for Kara and Martin Jordan.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Adam. So, hello. Oh, yeah, great. Whoa, there's a lot of light. This is great. We can't see you, but we hear you. This is fantastic. So, yeah, really glad to be here. And we have, this question. We are curious to understand who's actually working in the private sector at the moment. Okay, so who's working in the public sector? More than expected, that's great. And then, as we just saw in the presentation before, like it's a bit blurry, right? You might be working in a consultancy, working on a lot of public sector projects, so like that is luckily a bit muddy. So we are talking about a lot of the challenges that come with all of that, with being a catalyst for change. So a question we have related to that is like, who has found their work occasionally hard and tedious? Okay, I see the response. Yes. So we thought we have to really address that. So if you raise your hands, you're in the right space, so welcome.
So today we are going to be talking about the long slog of public service. We're going to try to give as much context to government and working in the public service as we can. And this is based on many conversations that we've had, and we think that many of these things apply to industries in the private sector as well. And we really want to talk about what keeps you going. So we're really curious about how people just keep working through quite hard and sometimes or often tedious work. But who are we to talk about this? So just a little further intro after that very nice intro that we had. So I'm Kara Kane. I'm the head of profession for design at the Government Digital Service in the UK. This is Martin Jordan, head of the design and user research at the Digital Service of the federal government, based here in Berlin. We also want to acknowledge Clara Griot, who is a collaborator in this work. She is not currently working. She's taking a break in Australia. So as I said, I work for the UK's Government Digital Service. That is part of the Cabinet Office, which is central government in the UK. Our mission is to design and protect the user experience of digital government for everyone that we serve. We work on things like gov.uk, the gov.uk design system, most recently OneLogin. We're about 600 people based across Bristol, London, and Manchester. So you might know GDS for gov.uk. This is one of the first things we've created. It's the single domain for all of the UK government, home to all of government information and services. And if you know GDS in a bit more detail, you might recognize some of these, which are what we call our digital service platforms. So this is things like our design system, or things like gov.uk Notify, which is one way to send letters, text messages, and emails to users.
And then in Germany, we're probably like at least a decade behind. We can openly admit that. The digital service here is just celebrating its third birthday this month. And what we do is transform government to digital delivery, and there needs to be a lot of delivery done. So currently we're just about 140 people, so less than a quarter of GDS at the moment, and that includes 21 user-centered design folks, so service designers, user researchers, and that's about like 15% of the organization. And we are working with a number of ministries, because we are technically a limited company owned by federal government. So we're working, for example, with the Ministry of Interior on digital identity. We are working with the Ministry of Finance on simplified tax declaration for property owners, and we're working on a number of justice services with the Ministry of Justice, and that includes things like legal aid and also like small claims. So a number of services that we are developing, also going into the platform levels.
So we've been exploring this topic of the long slog this year. Because as we've kind of started to set out in the beginning, things are hard, our peers are burning out, and we really need to support each other. So far this year, we have discussed this in an apolitical workshop, which was in April, held remotely online. And then most recently, we were actually in this conference venue in June for the Creative Bureaucracy Festival. And this is a photo to the right, which is a fishbowl that we hosted with some members of our international design and government community. And we most recently gave this talk to a public sector audience 2 weeks ago in Edinburgh at Service Design and Government. And this is the kind of first longer version of this talk. We're really excited to share it with you. We did some research. So we sent out a survey. We had 59 survey responses. The responses were from over 8 countries. We did some follow-up interviews with some of the people that responded, and it was really from a mix of different levels of government, so federal or central, local, city, and municipality level. And what we're going to cover, so we're going to get into the details of why things are hard. We're going to talk about how to keep going, and then we're going to wrap up with some recipes to try.
So what we have seen is that designing public services is not a sprint. It's more like a baton relay ultramarathon. And how can you train for that? Like, I'm not capable of doing that. So changing how a service works, kind of like end-to-end, front-to-back, and across channels, like doesn't happen in a snap. Often it may take people from different organizations, from different disciplines and professions to change just a tiny or small part of the thing. So there's one good example from the UK, the Czechia State Pension Forecast Service, and that is a thing that started transforming about a decade ago. And that work is still ongoing. They've been taking away silos between different government departments to bring data together. They've been changing how the letter is very crisp and clear, so far fewer people are kind of like calling. The letter basically looks like the online service in a way, with some of like the stats that people are interested in when they are expecting their pension forecast. But the scope continues to grow, and the work is still not finished after almost a decade. And building new digital transactions is often fast, and sometimes it's even easy, but changing then the rest of the service is most likely not. People might have actually a great deployment environment. They might be able to do kind of like countless little releases every day or every week, and they might be having a multidisciplinary team that ships new valuable functions at least every 2 weeks or so. But when you try to redesign a letter or deal with legacy IT systems, or in the government context try to get a revised piece of legislation in front of Parliament, for example, to get rid of some wet signatures that are written into law, that can take some months or years. In one specific example, it took actually 11 years. So this is a tweet from just a few weeks ago. This is from our colleague in the UK, Simon Manby, and his tweet says this: "Just us in the House of Lords watching the third reading of the Powers of Attorney Bill passing, culmination of 11 years of iterative work from a lot of amazing people. Now the real work starts." And we had a conversation with a team just 2 weeks ago, and they said, like, now it kind of like unlocks like a whole level of new service design possibilities, and the service designer is like really like deep into all the work once again. But many people don't stay that long. Simon has been on the team for a very long time, and so a few colleagues. But what we see is more something like that. So that's a screenshot from LinkedIn. That is from the government department behind that shown Check Your State Pension Service. Because on a median, people stay there 3.3 years. And obviously, that's not nearly enough time to do this end-to-end, front-to-back, cross-channel transformation work, right? So we found this really helpful quote from Sid Harrell. It says this: "This work is hard. I like to think of it as a collaborative 50-year project to enable our government to use technology as a tool to better serve the public. 50 years is a long time. Whatever project you take on, you will be carrying some of that weight of that time and that goal." So Sid Harrell has been writing a very great kind of like entry-level book for people entering the public service from a tech perspective, if you like. And Sid is currently the Chief Digital Service Officer for the city and county of San Francisco. So the question is like, are we actually prepared to carry the weight of a 50-year project? And has anyone told us that in our application interview? They haven't told me. So often services are designed by not just one single group of people, but multiple generations of teams. And whatever the exact number of years we're talking about, 50, 11 years, whatever it is, like we have to do this as a joint effort. And that means understanding as well different timeframes that we simply have to deal with. And that means adjusting to them and also design very carefully, designing handovers. So there's a very good illustration from one of my favorite books in service design context, that is Dan Hill's Dark Matter and Trojan Horses. So we've been adapting some things from that book a little bit. So what you can see here is different layers and levels. So all of these move at different speed. So at the very bottom, you have the very nature of government. And you can argue that it's probably like good for stability, that things are not changing that much on that end. We have seen, because GDS, for example, has been around for now more than a decade, that culture, the level just above, that has been changing to a degree, but very, very slowly. And then on the very other end, at the top, you have team sprints, because that's what teams do in a week or in 2 weeks. And things are moving really at high pace, right? So there's a lot that can happen very, very quickly. And then there are all these other layers in between: governance, infrastructure. That's really hard to change. That's probably also in the decade time span. And then election cycles, 4 or 5 years, funding cycles, similar-ish. Then we have annual objectives and quarterly objectives. So some of the things are moving much faster, but a lot of stuff is really slow by default. So let's make this a little bit more tangible with an example. And that's one actually from Germany around digital identity. So what you can see here is a snapshot of a very long journey map and experience map. How the experience of digital identity is in Germany. So there was a great discovery team. They've been looking into all of that, looking into the barriers that people have when they're trying to prove their identity online when using government services. Maybe there's a contextually important fact. So Germany has a great asset. It has physical ID cards with a secure chip, and that ID card is handed out to residents with visas, German citizens, EU citizens, and so on. But there are various barriers and blockers that actually hinder people from using their digital identity system that is available to them, especially online. So one barrier was an existing app. Other governments, including the UK government, tried to integrate the German stuff a few years ago, but that was a pain. That was a pain for the developers, but there's also a pain then for the users. So a team at the Digital Service in Germany started building a new identity app a few years ago, or like last year actually. And it was good that we could build on certain existing software frameworks and software development kits, so that wasn't too hard. But the biggest barrier the team identified while doing all of that was a letter, a very confusing letter. Because this is the letter that people receive when they get their ID card. And this letter is sent out in Germany to 8 million people a year. Unfortunately, people had no idea what this letter tried to tell them. It talked about a PIN, it talked about a transport PIN, it talked about a PUC, it talked about a locking password, and people were like, what? So they either binned the thing, or they thought, like, it looks important, I'm putting it into a folder. But what people didn't do, and that's what the letter tried them to do, is activate their ID card for online use. So the team then, although they were focused on a lot of the digital aspects, they were redesigning the letter. And they were, in that letter, telling people, like, what is this even good for? Like, explaining what you can do with it. What's kind of like, what are the jobs to be done that this thing is actually addressing when you are having your ID card. And all of that really matters because in combination, the improved app, or the vastly rebuilt app, and a new letter can very much improve the user experience. And the team could really iterate the app very, very, very quickly and deploy it, depending on kind of like pending reviews in the app stores, literally multiple times a week. But the letter, so the letter had some kind of predefined change process. So they're very specific rules, their stakeholders, and their timeframes. So luckily, both of these things sit in the Ministry of Interior. So, but the team that is more interested in all of the appy things, they are not the same people guarding kind of like that letter. So our teams had to understand how to even get the letter revised. And then those folks were like, why do you want to change the letter? We haven't heard any complaints. It's like, well, we have some data here, it needs changing. And then, so after going various rounds of consultations internally and so on, eventually that was then agreed by that other unit in the Ministry of Interior, and then, of course, handed over to another unit, even in another part of the public sector, to the Federal Printing Office. And then things basically ended up in a little bit of a black box. The team had to just sit and wait, do the other things, and just wait until finally the letter would appear. Eventually, from redesigning the letter to having people actually receiving that letter into their mail, it was 1 year. So API deployments really, really fast, multiple times a week, but then the letter taking easily a year. And the team had like multiple other ideas where it's like, oh, all this kind of like rubbing foil thing, that should probably not be on the back, let's move it to the front page. And people were like, ooh, that's probably 2-3 years. So the team kept iterating, but we have to just understand and acknowledge that these things really move at different levels at pace. So all of the app-related things, that's probably very much on the outer, faster lanes, right? But all of the things that we see underneath, when it comes to like software development kits, the idea of having a PIN, a PUC, a transport PIN, and all of that stuff, that is deeply ingrained into infrastructure, and that has been probably around for a decade or so. So changing these things simply takes time. So, and what we have seen is that rarely, very rarely, all of these layers kind of like align in your favor. So, more likely you really have to understand and work with them.
So that is a great example about why designing public services can be difficult, slow, and frustrating. So it's not always slow and frustrating, but it can be, and quite often is. So just to dive a little bit further into why things are hard. So you might have leadership buy-in, like you've finally gotten that leadership buy-in to do user-centered service design, but then you have no budget to go out and hire the team to do the work. You might have focused, really high-performing teams, but then a change in political priorities, which means that team has to drop what they're doing, shift, pick something else up, and work to becoming high-performing again. Or you might have new draft legislation to vastly improve the service, like that example in the beginning around power of attorney, but a very busy parliament, which means you have to wait in order to move that through. We have some recent headlines for you. So this one says, councils in England in crisis as Birmingham declares itself bankrupt. So how do you continue to work through increasingly difficult circumstances? Or this one, this is from 2021. This is one that we both experienced ourselves. It says, score of GDS staff moved to new central digital and data office. So how do you continue to work through ever ongoing organizational change and what we call in the UK machinery of government moves? So one day you're in one department, the next day you're moved, and you have to find out how this new organization works. Or this one, which is a latest press release, UK to host first global summit on artificial intelligence. So how do you continue to work through shifting political and public expectations with new technologies? There's this political need to be very forward-thinking with new technologies, and shifting priorities happen because of that, but then the outcomes and benefits are unclear, and these things are hard to work on. There's many forces at play with all of this. We just want to establish another framework that's going to support the rest of our talk. So this is an attempt to visualize some of these forces that we're going to be talking about throughout. So in the middle, there's you, and then there's the politics at the top, which kind of comes down onto you. There is the organization that you belong to, and then the thing that you work on in the context of service design, that's often a service or a service area. Depending on lots of different factors, probably circumstance and luck, hopefully you can influence your organization. Maybe a bit more, you can influence the service or service area that you work on. But then there's this thing that Martin and I talk a lot about in our work, which is community, which is kind of surrounding and permeating around you with the bottom areas, which is really vital when dealing with all of these forces at play. We also want to establish this before we continue. So our title, The Long Slog, it's long and it's a slog because what we're doing is complex change within a complex system. So within complex change, there are unknowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. There's lots of differing contexts, dependencies, timelines that make all of this hard. So we've acknowledged this, that there's all of these different things happening, moving at very different various speeds, and you need to plan for that. And you need to engage with all of these layers, not just the top three, which are your kind of team organizational levels, which are closer to you. But also as an individual, you need to think about all of these things to help you kind of manage your expectations when you're working on something and kind of better understand the reality of the thing that you're working on, which can hopefully maybe reduce some of the frustration that you have with this work. So we use this Ilya Saarinen quote a lot in our service design training, but we think this applies to change too. So it says, always design a thing by considering it in the next larger context. A chair in a room in a house in an environment in a city plan. So if you think about those layers and those timelines, that different context keeps changing and expanding. Do you know what these things are for you in the work that you do? Have you mapped out all the complexities of the system that you are working within? And do you know where you can focus and prioritize? Do you know what's coming up and when? And do you know where you can influence and where you can't, or maybe where you can't yet? With all of this, it's very easy to feel downtrodden. There's lots of things that you cannot control, lots of different speeds of change, lots of things that will just remain unknown to you, despite all the discoveries that you do. It's just hard. We're seeing people talk about this online. These are some I think within the last year, some Medium publications, so you're not alone. This is someone describing why they no longer believe in content design. This is a really good read. Or this person who states that the road to design maturity gets longer, and they're questioning whether they still want to call themselves a service designer because doing the work is hard. But we can help each other through it. We often say in the UK government kind of gov design community, we use the term keep going. We say it a lot at kind of meetups and events and in blog posts, but what does this really mean? And is it maintainable to keep going? Or are we just burning ourselves out? What might keep going look like? And how do we motivate ourselves and each other through this? So you kind of do what you can, and then you hand over the baton if you need to.
So back to bits of our research, we were really trying to understand what keeps people going, and what motivates them. So in the survey, when you send out a survey, you're like, yeah, some people might take a bit of time. When you have a lot of free text fields, you're not expecting much, but people have been writing paragraphs and paragraphs. So when we looked at all of that, we saw a number of things. So people said, well, other people keep me going. That's reasonable. That's what's really important to us. The mission is very important. So are we on a mission to do something that is deeply meaningful? And are we expecting to make some significant impact on people's lives? That is one of the main drivers why people are working in the public sector. And is it overall a challenge that I, on the one hand, feel equipped to be doing? And is it relevant that we can build kind of critical mass? And what we have seen is that it's really important to celebrate every little thing. And if you finally get that letter in the mail and your colleagues say oh, this letter is actually ours. Oh, I've received it as well. People are cheering, because it's a win. You've been waiting for that letter to arrive for 1 year. So one of the people told us that keep reflecting on the small wins and the tiny steps of progress, and helping the team see the impact they have had, which they won't be aware of compared to how things were before they arrived. So that is as well something that we have heard very much at the Service Design Government Conference just a few weeks ago, where people said yes, that this as a theme came up again and again, that look back, probably not where you have been 3 months ago, but probably a year or 2 years ago, you have been making progress, even if things are very hard. Another person said, there's something important in continuous storytelling. Don't need to be presentation decks for larger groups, but day-to-day, week-to-week communication with people doing the work. So that relates as well to documenting, to sharing, to capturing the history of the work. Because if you have multiple generations doing this larger service transformation, you have to kind of leave the breadcrumbs behind, so people can find that, the little narratives, the storytelling that did work, to constantly trigger that change. And then another person said, every change is a slog against ingrained practices, hierarchical management, and resistance to change. So protection of personal fiefdoms is a real and ongoing problem. So just acknowledging that it's hard. So one of the things that we also started talking in some of our training is resilience. We have to talk about resilience. And of course, huge caveat, we are not experts on that. This is a very shallow overview that follows now. We have seen that resilience as a term is used in a lot of different contexts. We are talking about it now in the context of the individual and also in the context of systems resilience. So you can look at resilience really from an individual level, but then a person, Bruce Daisley, has been looking at it in a wider context. So kind of like moving from resilience to fortitude. And that's also the title of the related book, where it's less dependent on the self and more dependent on the community. So it's not about you have to be strong and you have to get through it, but instead it's more around the power of the collective and supporting each other and drawing strengths from another. So when you start looking into some literature around resilience, you see certain aspects consistently coming up. So on the one hand, it's self-awareness and self-acceptance. So that means being aware of your own emotions, your abilities, your behaviors, but also of your own needs and desires and weaknesses. An important aspect is social context, of course, right? So if you surround yourself with empathetic people, they can help us realize that we're not alone in stressful situations, and we can find trustworthy and compassionate people that can help us understand our feelings. It's also about solution focus. So I can be kind of like frustrated and sitting in my pit, but in the moment I want to try to get out of that and solve problems effectively. Is really helpful to focus on the opportunities and alternatives that also, like, of course, require some openness to new ideas and perspectives. And then it's about future planning, so being aware of your own skills, of your competencies, and your resources. So, and then realistically, from where you are today, planning goals and actively shape your own future. It's about taking responsibilities, so making decisions as independently as possible from external factors and external influences, and then actively communicating as well your own resources again and your abilities. And last but not least, I have a related sticker on my laptop on that, optimistic realism. So like a certain positive attitude that strengthens your own ability to act in self-confidence. So that refers to a very realistic assessment of your abilities and their effective use.
So we also want to talk about system resilience. And Brenda Zimmerman, who was a Canadian complexity theorist, did a lot of work on this. Her work looks at how if systems resist change, as they do, then how do we then get the system to change? So there's two different models that Zimmerman looked at, one of them being engineering resilience. This is kind of always bouncing back to a status quo. So if you think about a bridge and how a bridge is built and how it gives to the wind, it can give, but then it goes back to its form. But then there's ecological resilience, which relates more to systems, organizations, and this is about kind of changing that status quo and moving to a new equilibrium. So kind of rather than always going back to this kind of first point, creating this new system through continuous learning and adaptation and change. Zimmerman also talks about this term snapback. So if we think about the bridge swaying in the wind, snapping back to its form. But with organizational change, how do we prevent that snapback? Because we need to change. And that snapback can happen at any level within systems and organizations. So if you think about at an organizational level, you might have really high user-centered design maturity, you have a full team, you have leadership, you have a head of design. But if you kind of lose that head of design, you lose some key people, you might go back to being an immature practice. And that can happen quite quickly. And I've seen that happen a lot across the UK government. So Zimmerman talks about some ways to prevent snapback, and these kind of lead nicely into some of the recipes that we're going to share in the next section. So some of the things that she talks about is around establishing new relationships, so finding the key people, finding the influencers, so to speak, in your organization or in the system that you're trying to change, this kind of audience of significance that can help you. Talks about paying attention to engagement and looking at kind of spaces and resources for listening and engaging. For us, this is supporting communities of practice. I think this one is familiar to a lot of us, which is shifting mindsets to driving new behaviors. She talks about strategic thinking. So rather than kind of trying to plan everything out and having a plan of how you think something can go, being more iterative in the way that you're working, looking for really small changes that could then lead to a bigger change. And also experimentation. So looking at what are safe to fail experiments, what are things that you can do to try to create change, and to lead you to that new equilibrium to prevent that snapback. So this is a little interactive bit before we go into what we think are things that you can do to change. So we would like you to go onto Slido and tell us about what you have tried to do to change the status quo in your work. So you can go to slido.com and you can use the code long-slog, or you can scan the QR code. And as people start to enter their things, it will show up on the screen.
And it's 21 participants typing. Oh, amazing. 30. Oh gosh, they're coming. Keep on smiling. Okay. Show up every day. Visualize. Show the outcome. Be vulnerable. Team building, gathering nucleus groups. Oh, good. Change mindset. Challenge. We always like to do that. Ask the tough questions. Visualize the challenge. Take initiative. Create alliances. Train others. That's a good one. Yeah. Visualize. Drink heaps. Or too fast. Be consistent. Education. Building capability. Talk to people. Hold retros. Good one. Good one. Good. Educate. Create a union. Yay. Create a union. Communicate. Share success stories. Present stories in innovative and creative ways. Be flexible. Employee experience. Inspire. Ask why we do things. Build relationships. Be curious. Accountability. Crying, if that helps. Yeah. Actively hire different folks. Ask why. Repeat. Listen first. Yeah. Okay. That is a lot, and people keep typing. Okay, it slows down a little bit, but exit from a usual social and professional bubble. Communities of practice. Make people feel safe. Communicate, question everything. Pick small pieces. Be nice. Hug my enemies. Okay. We'll have a look at all of these.
Yes.
Thank you.
We did this in Edinburgh 2 weeks ago, and we had, I think, some different responses.
Yeah.
Each time we were doing it, we get something a bit different, and they're also a bit different from what we're going to share. So we have been collecting some recipes to help build resilience to create change. We have 5 for you. And before I get into the first one, just want to set out that we realize not everyone has the influence or the leadership level to do all of these things. We'll call it out where we think something requires more leadership versus what is possible at a practitioner level. So recipe 1 is offer a tool that multiplies. This one works at an organizational level. This is about creating tools or frameworks to establish ways of working, to build capability, and to demonstrate value. So this one does require a level of seniority, kind of a lead design or head of design level, someone that has the space and the influence to create tools in an organization, but also the ability to make sure that they are maintained. It requires air cover, so you need leadership to be like, okay, yeah, I'm happy for you to go do that thing. And you need autonomy, so you need to be able to do it the way that you think you should do it, the way that you think is best. You need people and skills, so you might need an interaction designer or developer to help you make the tool. And you need teams willing to collaborate, so people that are going to use the tool, that are going to test it with you. And this is an example that we have. So this is from Andy Jones, who is the head of design at the UK's Department of Education. He's doing the hard work to make it simpler to apply the service standard. So the service standard is a set of 14 points that services in the UK across the public sector work to meet. Some services are assessed against that 14-point standard, but it's kind of this universal, very widely known tool or product that teams use. So this this tool that Andy created with his team is about applying the service standard to the Department for Education. So it's not a replacement for that service standard that I mentioned. It's really complements it as guidance, and it's really set into the context and the complexities of the Department for Education and the users of those DFE services. So how did Andy kind of create that thing? First, he spotted a problem. He did lots of research. He found things weren't working, and he realized that he could improve things for the department. He saw that there were really inconsistent ways of working across all of the digital agile teams working on different services across the organization. There was also a very differing understanding of what good looked like for the department. And then there was a lack of collaboration across teams. So none of the teams were talking to each other, collaborating, supporting each other. He used evidence to back this up. So what he did is he took screenshots of start pages and showed how they all have a very different experience for the user. So a start page on gov.uk is like the entry point into a digital service. So Department for Education might have 30, 40 or more of these, and they all looked different. So he had the evidence to say, this isn't working, we're not consistent. Made the thing, and then measured the impact. And the impact was that there was increased collaboration across those teams. There was more consistent ways of working, because they were working to the standard. There was increased attendance at show and tells, so behavior started to change. There was increased use of another tool that they created, which is called Design Histories, which I don't have time to get into, but I recommend looking up. They had other departments in the UK government start to use this model of a tool to help you apply the standard. So other departments are using this. And then also improved outcome. So for those services that do kind of go through that assurance process to meet the standard, they were getting better outcomes of people meeting the standard. And then you have to ensure success. So how did they do that? They were creative with headcount, so they were able to get a developer in from another team to help them, kind of as on the side, as a side project. They were able to link it to the work of leadership objectives, and they were really careful to be strategic about when to push on wanting to create this tool and what they think it could do, and when to pull back and not apply too much pressure. Another example of a tool to help create change. This is one that is from a former GDS designer who's still in the Cabinet Office, who did work on universal barriers. So this is a framework to think and design services to be more inclusive and equitable. This work started in 2017, is an ongoing, and Ben did this as a senior service designer. So this is a practitioner level example. There was a lot of work to create the framework, but then there's also work to share it, to get people to adapt it, to kind of build community around the thing and learn how people are using it. And this has been picked up by various people across the public sector, including the NHS Education for Scotland.
Recipe number 2, make yourself useful. I mean, it's good to be useful, right? But we mean is really demonstrating value by delivering something to build trust, even if you do not consider it being the right thing. So that means really delivering a thing to show value and to prove value. So it means chipping in, even regardless of the role you have. You might be saying, like, this is not really on my job description, but that helps to build trust with those around you. And it sometimes means as well being not so dogmatic about good service design approaches, not expecting, for example, the perfect team setup to be in place to deliver really good work. And that's something, for example, we have seen in the French government, where some designers were very precious about working in a truly agile environment, and others were not. They were like, okay, if there are some big waterfall project, but we can insert ourselves into these things, we gonna work from the inside to change the practices. So instead of waiting for the right approach to appear, just going in there. So and that requires a few things. We think that applies from junior to head-off level, so some confidence in your skills, then empathy for the people and the situations around you, and as well to a certain degree, access. And it means also not being afraid to be scrappy. So you can have your principles, that's great, but sometimes it's also looking at like what might actually help and what might be creating value to some, so not being too precious. And it can occasionally feel like a bit of a detour, but often it's a good way to get closer to your destination. So one of the things from Digital Service in Germany, we were asked to look at a digital check for new legislation. So making new legislation to be digital ready, so that new laws later would not hinder digital implementation of services. For example, you want to prevent that people have to still sign somewhere on paper and so on, right? Or that two kind of like out-of-date solutions are written into law. So, and the first thing the service designer, Sabrina, was doing is like mapping out the legislative process. And some people were like, come on, we know how that works. And she's like, okay, let's have a look. And it turned out that there are way more common and not so common ways how laws actually emerge than anyone had expected. So there's a 6-7 meter long map on our wall on the second floor. If you come later, we can have a look at this thing in the evening. So, and this is very much about building trust with the different ministries, because we had to establish trust that we are the good partner to do that. And almost a year later, by having this thing and constantly referring now to that thing, it allowed us to talk about lawmaking as a service and how we can establish support systems around all of that.
Recipe 3, communities are the glue. This one is the community level, which bleeds into the you part of our framework, as well as the service and the organization. This is all about leaning into getting to know, supporting, and learning from the people that we work with. This one applies to most levels, but you do need someone senior that can support this work to kind of create the space for community and relationship building, and to establish and maintain a strong community of practice. This one requires time, so people need to have time kind of off of projects, off of teamwork to be able to spend time doing that community work. You also need the willingness, so you need people to want to do that, and then also you need the support and structure in place to enable that to happen. So from our survey, one of the respondents said that working with great people who care about what they do and each other is something that keeps them going. Someone else said, we lean on each other for support, for venting and therapeutic relief, and for validation that we're not all going mad. Like this one resonates a lot. This is a poster that we have up in our GDS offices that says, come because of the work, stay because of the people. This is a poster that was designed by a former head of design at GDS, Stephen McCarthy. And this is something that really holds true, especially for designers at GDS. They talk a lot about how the design community keeps them there. Someone on LinkedIn responded to our call for survey responses, and they said, it was most crucial to have a support system and mentors by my side. They kept me going, especially during the sometimes long slog of service design. And someone else said, while peer exchange is often framed for knowledge transfer, it also has an essential role in nourishing, remotivating, and stimulating change makers. So this really idea of community and peer exchange really resonates with a lot of people that we spoke to and that did the survey. So communities being the glue, this is enabled by communities of practice, which some of you might have in your organization, but also things like coaching, buddying, or mentoring schemes, random coffees, just helping you meet different people in your organization or across the service design community. Things like team socials, networks that you might have in your organization, meetups, and then what we might think is basic but very fundamental is Slack or some other comm space that allow you to talk to people in your organization and to start to build those communities and relationships. We also found that sometimes this idea of community is required to build trust and to get the space to work differently. So we spoke to some local government design leaders in the UK, and they said this. They said, you can bring knowledge and experience, but so much of what we do is about relationships. So you have to build your reputation, and then you can get teams on board. So it's really all about people.
Recipe number 4, be ready to use the window. Not jumping out of the window, but rather like using the window to enter. So this is very much about waiting. It's about patience and about opportunities. So often there are opportunity windows that are rising, and that's often at the political or organization level. So that's linked to maybe change of government or change of a minister. But I've seen this as well when I was in the private sector. Suddenly a new leader coming in with a very different spirit, and then you might be able to pitch a thing that your previous boss has been rejecting. New person who could be kind of like more receptive to the same idea and was very proudly like owning that as well. So that means having as well your ambitions ready so that when the opportunity arises, you are ready to put your ideas forward. We had a good example of a service designer, Kate Williams, who has been head of design at GDS for a while, and she had this one very simple way of presenting the overall function or the overall things you have to do in a service via a step-by-step navigation. And that was a thing, like having a clear navigation for a service that she has been pitching for years. And then, after a lot of like, no, can't prioritize that, Brexit happened. And Brexit was suddenly a thing where you had to have like really clear structures of what to do in a certain service when you want to import or export stuff. So suddenly, a very change of government allowed kind of like a window to open so she could talk in a new context about the work that she had prepared for years. So that requires kind of a constant scanning, focus on ambition, and also some leverage. We have seen that in very practice in the context of GDS creation, essentially. So now there are literally thousands of designers and user researchers working in the various parts of UK government, a lot of humans there, and we have seen all of that being massively enabled by a letter, by a report that was written to that minister, Francis Mort, back in 2010, because the person who was writing that, Martha Lane Fox, was also a co-founder of lastminute.com and was on the board of Twitter. She was at that time the digital champion for UK government. So she had some leverage. She had the opportunity to make a case for a new way of rethinking the experience that people have with the state and bringing in public sector, bringing in private sector people to change the way government is working. So, and that minister was kind of like not having much to lose. He was in a new government set up, and he had a lot of political capital to spend at the end of a very long career. So he was able to create the space and as well the air cover to allow GDS to establish itself and to create one single website for government. A very different example is from Germany. Here, opportunity window was used back in 2018, where the guy at the bottom middle, Andre, he was a German Harvard student who just came back to Germany, and he was a little bit frustrated with the state of German government and its lack of digital progress. And then Angela Merkel was just appointing a new minister for the Federal Chancellery. That's the gentleman in the middle there. And it was basically Angela Merkel's right hand, and he was just new in the role. And one night, Andre was trying out email addresses to message that new minister to pitch his idea of creating a fellowship and bringing in new young tech people into government to show that change can be possible. And Helge Braun, that minister, had not communicated his email address to anyone. So it was literally one of the very first emails he ever received in his role. And he said later that if he had received that email, even like a few weeks later, he would not have responded. So there was Andre just in a night, just trying to figure out email combinations to kind of like bring in young people into government to change things. So, and 2 years later, like that led to the creation of the digital service in Germany, and this is also like why I'm now standing here, essentially. last recipe.
Last recipe. This one is called Let's Try Again. All of us can do this one. So if you are blocked in your current team or organization, be open to trying somewhere else. So go to where the opportunity might be, or retry something that you've done, so that you can get a change of perspective and maybe find some new walls to run into. So this one requires the willingness to start again, so you have to want to have some sort of change, but you also need the capacity to start again, so that you might need to think about finances and whether that works for you. And you also need to do some sort of failure analysis to understand, why are the things that I've tried, why are they working, why is it so hard? Who has moved organizations? I'm sure a lot of us in the room. We see this a lot in the UK government, of people moving from one department to another, people moving in and out of local government, people moving from local council to local council, and people moving back and forth between the private sector and the public sector. Within our UK context, this could be a loan where you're kind of loaned out to another department for a period of time. It could be a secondment, which is a really short period of time when you go and do something else in a different organization. It could be a career break where you just step away and you go do something else, or a career change, so moving, for example, from content design into service design. This one's really not about starting over. It's about trying again. The local gov design leaders that we mentioned a while back, they framed moving from different local councils as, how can I do this thing better, which is a really nice framing. So these are our recipes. Offer a tool that multiplies. Make yourself useful. Communities are the glue. Be ready to use the window, and let's try again. If none of these work, it's okay to walk away. We can all do that. It's really okay to quit. You can always return. We see that happening at GDS. People come back. Because the burnout really isn't worth it. We need to take breaks, we need to rest, we need to go and work on something else that we might care a little bit less about in order to get that break and that headspace, which I personally did about a year ago. It was very worth it. And we need to decide how and if to keep going through this long slog, and we need to help each other through it. So to wrap up, we're going to return to this quote from the very beginning from Sid Harrell about the conviction that this is a 50-year project. Sid says, the current civic tech project is really a 50-year project intended to change institutions that we hope will last hundreds more. This is a response from Shua Huang, who is the CEO, COO, and co-founder of Nava, which is a US public design agency. Last year, Shah responded to Siv's work and the idea of the 50-year project. And he said, but it's not just about looking forward. We also have to look to the past in the history of this work. He says that civic tech is a young field with old roots. And by tracing the histories, we can learn how to become more resilient. So we really wanted to end on that, to learn from all of us in places like this, to learn from all of the work that people have done, all of the long slog and years that people have put in that can help us move all of this forward. Thank you.